Thanks for joining us this week on the show. I am thrilled to introduce you to Liz Long, an author who shares her vulnerable personal story, a journey of a childhood shaped by trauma, and her passion now through her own personal healing to help people understand the pitfalls of living in Victimtown and the potential of moving yourself into Freedomville. I know you're going to love this conversation. We talk frankly, so if there's littles around, you might want to pop in the earbuds, but enjoy this talk and welcome back to Happified. I am so thrilled to have you with us. It's time to flip the script on stress and learn how to thrive today and throughout your days. Join me for inspiration and interviews with folks who are shining their light in the world in the areas of positive mindset, health, and well-being. I'm your host, Susi Vine. Let's get happified. Welcome back. I am so happy to have you with me this week on the show, coming back with a fresh season of Happified, and I am thrilled to honor one of my very first guests back as Liz Long. In 1968, her life took a tragic turn when a close family member, Linda White, went missing, pushing then 6-year-old Liz into a shitstorm of epic proportions. 5 agonizing years later, Linda's body was finally discovered, but her case remains one of Canada's longest unsolved crimes. At 58, Liz confronted her adult depression by checking into an inpatient treatment center for healing. With unwavering grit and a touch of humor, Liz untangled the complexities of her past, realizing that childhood coping mechanisms were never meant to be permanent. Now at the forefront of mental health advocacy, Liz shares her journey and introduces the world to Victimtown through her book, Navigating Shitstorms: How to Find Your True Path When Life Gets Rough. In this poignant narrative, she creates spaces like the Guilt and Shame Cafe and the Denial Trails, inspiring readers to confront their own storms and discover resilience within. So you can already tell why I'm a big fan of Liz and what she is sharing with the world, because I'm passionate about discovering how we cultivate resilience, how we really have to. And it's not always an innate skill, but I believe that anybody can when we choose to take on that power. Liz, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thanks, Susi. I'm really happy to be here this morning.
And although I will admit I haven't had a chance to read the book, I've been studying up and read some reviews and a synopsis of the book. And I love the way that you created kind of a multi-level, multifaceted story for your readers, but also it sounds like a real toolkit, sharing what you came to discover through your own journey for healing. How did you come to the place where you discovered you were ready to share this book?
That was a very long journey. I'm not sure how to answer that question in like a sentence or two. I spent several months at a treatment center dealing with my own shit and figuring that out. And when I left, the next 4 or 5 months I spent reintegrating into the real world and reevaluating how I wanted to live and what I wanted to do. And that was when a career change was in order, and I wanted to help other people find their own paths. And the book, Navigating Shitstorms, was born from that.
Beautiful. And I think that point at which we recognize things can't continue the way that they have been, but also where it's time to take a stand and you feel like other people have to be aware of this. And there are other voices in the arena. People resonate with different things, different voices. And I'm so grateful that you took that opportunity to put your own voice out there. And what is truly a unique story. I remember as a kid growing up in the 80s, these true crime mysteries were on TV. The public really got invested in these true crime stories. And I can't imagine what it would have been like to be living at the center of that. And so Linda was actually your aunt?
She was technically my aunt, but our age difference in relationship was more like a sister. She was my regular and frequent babysitter. My mom was the oldest and she was the youngest.
And I can't imagine how that would have impacted your parents then, and you were only 5. And although I haven't had children myself, I I recognize that, well, and we all do, right? We're all doing the best we can with the tools we have available. But that kind of situation, and for your mother to be then suddenly taking care of her parents, going through her own grief and devastation with what's unfolding, and having young children. Your younger brother was at what age at this point?
He was 2.5.
Wow, a toddler,
Yeah.
and all of this going on. And
Yeah.
looking back, it's easier to see how everyone handled their shit at this point. We're just going to speak frankly in this conversation because it'll flow more easily. But talk about coping mechanisms, right? How do you come out of that situation without a lot of them? And when did you start to see these coping mechanisms and their role in your life? Was that after you had been getting the support?
Oh, of course. I mean, my whole life, those coping mechanisms and the beliefs I adopted played out. I just didn't see where they originated. So when I was very young, I adopted some beliefs that out of the situation that I held on to for most of my life. I realized quickly that my needs were not important. And I mean, I was living in a crisis and my needs weren't important at that time. But that I held on to that for my entire life. So I had no boundaries and I had no voice. I didn't know how to ask or achieve anything that I wanted or needed. And I had very little self-worth. So that also played out with dysfunctional and abusive relationships because that's what I was attracting. That's where I was in my life. Yeah.
And so I understand that you were married previously and you have sons?
Yes. Yeah. I was married for about 7 or 8 years and I have 2 boys. They're now grown. They're 32 and 34.
And so you became a single mother at still perhaps a somewhat young age too. They were pretty young.
Yeah. I was 39 and my boys were 7 and 9 or 5 and 7. Yeah. Yeah, so I have an ex-husband, I have an ex-fiance, and a few ex-boyfriends. None of those relationships were very healthy or good.
But now there's so much more awareness.
Absolutely. I'm a very different person now than I was through those years.
And I think if we could somehow conjure that gift of that retrospective vision of being able to look back and see how the pieces fit into place and make sense of our behaviors and reactions as life is unfolding, it would be a completely different story, obviously, but it would be powerful comfort as we're going through all of those trials to recognize,
yes,
we're zeroing in on something better as long as we're learning from these lessons along the way.
That's the key. As long as we have the awareness to learn as we go and the courage to really look at ourselves.
Yes, exactly. And so I'd love to take a look at, through your experience and the work now that you share through your stories, how do you see your inner dialogue, the evolution of that, the impact of that affecting your mental health?
That's a really great concept, and it's foundational to my work and my book. I talk so much about the voices in our head. And in the creation of Victimtown, and you mentioned a couple of places, the Guilt and Shame Cafe, the Denial Trails, there's also the Control Factory, the Anger Gas Station, the Resentment Parking Lot, and Epiphany Hospital, where you definitely don't want to land. Each of those places, I provide a name for the voice in our head that resides when we're hanging out in those places. And that's the voice that makes us afraid. It's the voice that tells us to play small and don't speak up. And it's the voice that came about through whatever experiences we had as a child. And one of the most interesting things when I came out of the place and was doing a lot of research about childhood trauma, the thing that surprised me the most was that the most influential factor as to how we ended up faring as an adult was not the severity of what happened to us when we were kids. It was how we responded to it. And there's a lot of children that are already resilient or that have support. And then there's other children that are more sensitive. And it's not a competition anyways. It's a judgment as to how severe something was. But something that might be deemed fairly insignificant can completely derail a child if they took it to heart, literally, right? So it doesn't take that much for us to lose our path. Yeah, so the voices in our head, all the shitty ones that come from Victimtown that try to control us and keep us afraid, they're just one voice. We all have another one, and I call it our heart voice. And that is the voice that is founded in love, and we were all born with one. And we each need to find our own path back to activating that voice, and then we can learn to hear it more frequently and louder, and we can practice trusting it and acting on it. And that's how we get out of Victimtown and on our way to Freedomville. And I share in my book the things that helped me find my path, but it's not a prescriptive, here you go, follow these directions and everything will be glorious. I wish it could work that way. The truth is, everybody has to find their own way. So I share some guidance and tips for people to do that, but you got to do the work.
There's no fast track to handing a microphone to the heart voice and saying, it's your turn.
No, give me the answers. Tell me what to do, where to go. How do I manage this? No, the answers are there, but the answers are within all of us. And the answers for every human are a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Truly. And it is difficult. And I think this is something that I recognize and I try to encourage people to see for themselves, is that it's so easy for that voice to be drowned out because everyone's demanding our time, our attention, the notifications are always on top of those little inner shitty voices that are protecting us, keeping us safe, holding us back, limiting us, and that sort of thing from different aspects of. I love the different neighborhoods in Victimtown. I think that everybody, just hearing them without getting to read through the book, like, oh, I get that. I get that denial trail. I get, what are some other ones? Sorrow Swampland. It's so descriptive. I love that you brought a bit of levity to sharing what can be really heavy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. The other nice thing that the naming of the places in Victimtown and the name of the voice there does is that it makes it less vulnerable to open up dialogue, either to share with other people how we're feeling, what's going on in our world, or to ask questions and support people that we love that we suspect might be having a struggle.
Yes. Yeah. And I think especially with the generation that we were raised in and that we were raised by, this kind of vocabulary certainly wasn't available to our parents, but wasn't available to us as children. And it gives me a lot of hope to see that younger kids, schools are trying to integrate some of these emotional tools and vocabulary so that they have some of this to work with, but having names for this rather than coming with all these recognitions our own. When we give ourselves the time and space to even have these recognitions, like we've kind of come quite a learning curve, I feel. Yeah. It's about time and it's heading in the right direction. You know, just even since COVID, the whole awareness around mental health and the issues that people have been navigating with their own mental health were completely ramped up. So it's a good thing that it's more out in the forefront, and it's less daunting to have those conversations for schools and corporations, etc. Yeah, it's a good thing. And I think it makes it a little less scary for us to make space to work through the feelings. And I think that's something that you share in the book as well, that building that skill or the strength to feel our feelings.
Yeah.
What did you find in that process for yourself?
Yeah, well, it takes practice and it's scary and hard. I mean, for my experience was I had shoved that shit down for so many years. I mean, I was not obtuse about what happened in my childhood. And there have been TV shows and documentaries and other books written. And it was very much out in the forefront and always ongoing. So it wasn't something that I denied, but I I didn't deal with the feelings. I shoved them down and locked them up. And there was a lot of stuff down there. And it was through COVID, actually. And that was a factor. There were other contributing factors, but it just all started leaking out. And that's the thing when we aren't able to process our feelings. They're not meant to be stuck inside us. They're meant to flow through us. And sometimes you can just do a little bits at a time. I did a huge invasive thing. I checked myself in. I was there for months, and I was focused on nothing other than dealing with those feelings and releasing them. You know, they cause physical harm to our bodies as well on a cellular level if they get stuck, the pain and the hurt inside us. And it's not something we intentionally do, particularly when we're kids, right? We don't know any better. And as you said, our parents couldn't have those conversations to help us through that. Yeah, but it's never too late. So, and you don't have to do it all at once either. You can do it in little bits. And I would invite people to go at their own pace and feel their way through feeling all that shit too. We don't give ourselves enough grace oftentimes. We're pretty hard on ourselves.
I agree 100%. That's something that, you know, I dance with that myself. Am I giving myself grace, or am I letting myself off the hook? But asking yourself that is a powerful sign, right? Self-awareness and recognition. And I think we need to extend more grace to other people, because we never really understand what's going on below the surface there or historically, but especially to ourselves, because we really can be hard on ourselves while the world is careening wildly around us.
Yes, and that's the thing. We can't ever stop shit from happening. And so it makes sense to learn to become better responders. And that's a conscious awareness as to what voice in our head we are choosing to listen to and believe. I mean, it's not a bad thing to land in Victimtown in any of those places. And we often do, and I still do. And that's where we learn our most valuable life lessons, is in some of those places. We need to go there. The problems, however, arise when we get stuck there. And that's where we're living our lives. Yeah. There's no peace, love, freedom, or joy in Victimtown.
And how would, in your perspective, I mean, we all visit Victimtown, like you said, and I can definitely see that myself. Do you feel like some people, most people, what's the propensity for people getting stuck there?
I think 90% of the world is living in Victimtown.
They're
just
just
bouncing around.
The
they're bouncing around from the control factory, where the voice in our head tells us we need to rescue people. We can't be happy until we're in a big house. We can't be happy until we lose 20 pounds, where something has to happen. Some external circumstance needs to exist before we can be happy. To the denial trails, where we drink alcohol to numb, we shop, we gamble, we exercise, we work, we do all the things to keep ourselves so busy we don't have to feel. We hang out on a ruminating raft or a worry raft in the Sorrel Swampland, where we're worried about the what ifs in the future, and all we can do is think about what happened last week and replay shit in our heads, you know. The Anger gas station, all those places, that's where most of the world is hanging out until they wake up. And I'm hopeful that when the reader reads about these places in the book and what the voices in our heads say when we're in those places, that they'll have a new awareness of where they are. And that's always the first step. We can't make any changes or go someplace else or do anything differently until we come to terms with where we actually are. And everybody sees themselves in some of the places in Victimtown. And that's okay, right?
Right?
It's okay.
Like you say, we still, you know, visit, even if we're not living there. Recognizing it is everything, because nobody can hand you a ticket out except yourself. You have to find your own.
Exactly. Yes. But when we're aware of the places, you can't unknow it. Once you know it, you can't unknow it. And then when we get triggered, when shit happens and we get triggered and we land there, we go, oh, damn. I'm in the guilt and shame cafe. This is not where I want to be. And then we could laugh a little bit about it and have that new awareness after a couple of hours or a couple of days instead of a couple of years, right?
Yes.
And then we can get out. And it's a journey and it's fluid. And we will always go back there. I think that's the quintessential human journey, but it's not, it's part of the process. And I think the most foundational thing to living in the anti-place that I call it from Victimtown is Freedomville. And that's where we want to spend most of our time. And we have to learn to love ourselves to be there.
Yes. Which is another one of the things that I think so many of us really struggle with. Self-worth, self-love. And then we decide to be hard on ourselves and hold this picture of what perfect self-love looks like. And well, I'll never get there from here. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what are some of the indicators or benchmarks of Freedomville? How do we cultivate more of that?
It's about going back and figuring out how you got to where you are now. And so having a hard look at your childhood and how that affected you, and then doing whatever you need to do, whatever feels right to process and heal those things. And that's what's different for everybody. And the wonderful thing is today, there are so many modalities and options for working through whatever happened to you today more than ever. You can be self-taught. There's all kinds of wonderful books out there to read. And I'm working on guidebooks for each of the places for my readers to make those connections and reflect on their own childhood and work through the process as I describe it. But there's therapy, there's nature, there's meditation. There's just so many things. And I would encourage people to keep trying and exploring until it works.
Because it is.
Yeah.
Everybody's map is going to be completely unique.
Yeah, we're all here to learn different things, right? And that's the interesting part too, is that when we choose not to learn the lesson and keep going, the universe is just going to up the ante and just give us another try. I mean, I had a lot of opportunities to learn a shred of self-worth in the relationships that I experienced over the years. You know, I might beat myself up a bit and say you're a really freaking slow learner on that one, Liz. And we all learn things and do this work when we're ready to.
Right.
Right? When we become aware. So that's part of the wonderful thing about naming these places in Victimtown, is that my hope is it will jolt a whole new population of people into an awareness of where they're hanging out, and then they'll start to make a plan to live in Freedomville.
And one of the things that you talk about with that, restoring yourself, and you talk about radical self-care. And I'd love to hear your take on that, because some people think self-care is a dirty word. It's all bubble baths and expensive spa treatments, and I don't have time for that. And so what made that click for you in your life?
I really got started when I stayed at the place, because the routine and the environment was so conducive to that. And it doesn't have to cost money. And it's a little bit different for everybody else. It's just becoming in tune with what fills you up, what increases and feeds your own heart. Nature is a big part of that for me. I love the ocean. I love walking in the rainforest. Meditation is also a big part. I do some exercise. I do fun exercise. So there's all kinds of different things, you know, and the basic components never should be underestimated. The food that we eat, the sleep that we get, and I'm not perfect about any of that, but I do what I intrinsically know my body needs for self-care. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is a process of discovery, because it is completely unique.
Yeah.
Some through lying, getting into nature, I think, is just healing. We're definitely healed when we have that opportunity to be in nature. Yeah. But if you live in a city, there are still other things that you can do to fill your cup, to fill you up.
Exactly. Yes. And so I crafted this definition, and this is what it's like to live in Freedomville. And I call it intrinsic courage. And it's our ability to view every past experience and every current situation and every person involved, which also includes ourselves, with compassion and love and gratitude. And when we're able to do that, it doesn't really matter what happens. It doesn't really matter what happens because it's a choice. It's a perspective, and it's a choice that we make as to, we get to decide what everything means, right? Now, notwithstanding, there are tragic things and horrible, awful, painful things that occur, and it doesn't diminish the sorrow and the pain. And we need to work through that. I'm talking about the little things all day, the little shitstorms that we have a choice. We can decide how disastrous that's going to be and where we want to hang out as we tell the story about what happened and what it means, either in Victimtown or in Freedomville.
And you're talking about having compassion for everyone involved, including ourselves, which can be tricky. It's easier to extend it sometimes than it is to reflect that back on ourselves. And I know forgiveness plays a part too. Could you talk a little bit about how you view forgiveness or the power of it?
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it earlier in a little bit different terms, but the way I describe it, and it's the same concept, everybody is doing the best that they can with the resources they have available in that moment. And the biggest resource we have is our heart voice power. And self-care is one of the ways that we keep ourselves full of that. And self-love is one of the ways we keep ourselves full of that. And the people that cause us pain or that act out in unkind ways are just reflecting what's inside them. That is the pain that they have not yet processed or been able to deal with. And it's not offered as an excuse for any behavior, but rather as a reason. And when we understand that reason, that they are in as much or more pain than they're causing someone else, we can view them with compassion and love. And when we can process whatever they say or do in a way that keeps us in Freedomville, we can be grateful to them for that opportunity to either learn or practice. Right?
And I think that's really powerful, because forgiveness is one of those concepts that it's easy for us to get hung up on. Are they worthy of forgiveness? Do they deserve it? And I think that understanding, like bringing compassion to the situation and having that ability to get the greater view is really powerful. And it starts to free us from what we can carry around from different situations, from these lessons.
Yeah, exactly. You nailed it. Forgiveness is not for them. Forgiveness is for us. And it doesn't mean that we have to continue to have them in our lives. We can forgive and move on with different boundaries, or completely cut them out of our lives and wish them well. And that's okay. It's the not continuing to harbor the resentment and the pain inside us. And to truly understand every single human is deserving of peace, love, freedom, and joy. And we never know what somebody else has had to deal with over the years or is currently having to navigate. Nobody has any idea.
Truly. It's a powerful perspective to hold.
Yeah.
It really helps.
And it takes practice. It took me, I wrote an article, it got published, I forget what magazine, and the title is Why I No Longer Wish My Ex-Husband Dead.
That's growth.
Yeah. Only took me 30 years. 30 years. And that's true. But how sad that for 30 years I harbored all that pain and resentment and hate. And with not getting into the abuse and what actually went on, because it's actually irrelevant, it's been a game changer. Right? We hold on to shit. And that's a Victimtown thing. We get there. So the resentment parking lot, there's grudge telling events with bullhorns and we have crowds of people, and people, they vie for who's got the worst story. And it cultivates that community. And lots of us, I mean, I used to hang out there, and lots of people do, but is that really how you want to live?
Bingo.
Your life?
Exactly. That's the powerful question. Is this really how you want to live your life? Without judgment and being hard on yourself on how it has looked until this point, right? Because all we have impact on is this moment and moving forward, but mostly just this moment.
Right? That's only this moment.
Ourselves, what we might do in the future either. Just keep on showing up. Keep on showing up. Bingo. Exactly. That's the powerful question. Is this really how you want to live your life? Without judgment and being hard on yourself on how it has looked until this point, right? Because all we have impact on is this moment and moving forward, but mostly just this moment.
That's only this moment.
Ourselves, what we might do in the future either. Just keep on showing up. Keep on showing up.
Yeah. So in my book, I have this diagram, and there's one, it's called the shitty life circle. And in the center of the diagram, there's this shit happens explosion. And then it's a choice. If we listen to one of the Victimtown voices, we go down around here and we have futile coping mechanisms. And then we come around and then we stay in Victimtown and then we come around again because guess what? Shit's always going to happen. But the other choice is we listen to our heart voice and we adopt healthy coping mechanisms and we circle through Freedomville. But then we eventually come around again to shit happens. And that's the point where it's a choice. It's a choice.
Yes, that's beautiful and empowering. I hope everybody can take that away. Whatever brought you to this point, we have the power to change things. The choices keep coming around because shit keeps happening. But how do we want it to look from here?
Yeah.
And I want to take a look at, too, before we go, because part of your story that you share is you received a diagnosis of ADHD fairly recently. And how has that kind of landed with you and shaped the way that you move through life?
It's just a label. And it also was somewhat of a relief as an explanation, because I always thought in the back of my mind that I had some deficiency, that there was something that wasn't quite up to snuff about the way my brain processed things. So it did provide that explanation, which I thought was really interesting. And when I was a kid, that wasn't a thing. Nobody got assessed for that. And I went through my adult life and I owned houses and raised children and I was entrepreneurial. I had my own business and I managed. And my strategy through most of that was checklists and systems. I had robust Excel checklists, and that's how I functioned. And I didn't have a checklist for writing a book. I'd never been an author before, and it wasn't in the content creation that I struggled. That really flowed and that was easy. It was during the editing process where individual chapters were getting emailed and track changes in Word and different versions of files, and literally my brain was about to explode. My computer almost landed in the lake multiple times. And so the diagnosis probably saved the book, to be honest. It allowed me to take a couple breaths and a big giant step backward and say, okay, we just need a system for this. And so then I mapped out a protocol and a system for how I would manage the files and all of those things. It's like 63,000 words in multiple files. Like it was a lot. And then once I had that, so I actually took a couple weeks off doing anything and just made a plan that my ADHD brain could execute to do it. And then it was fine. So it also made me feel a little bit better about the way that I showed up, that my brain showed up in the world, that it wasn't that I was deficient. There was actually an explanation. But beyond that,
So sometimes labels help. Again, to give ourselves some grace, right? Because we see other people operating just fine and wonder why we might be struggling with a certain piece of process. But I can imagine files and revisions going back and forth. And it's easy to see how that could brew into quite a storm.
If we focus on the explanation and how it can help us grow, I think it's a positive thing. When we use it to compare ourselves to others, that usually doesn't help.
Right. It's not only about measuring up.
Yeah.
One question that I love to ask my guests is, what is your go-to when you're feeling stressed, when you need to hit reset or step into some radical self-care? Is there something that always helps support you, or top of your list?
Yeah, my first go-to, a meditation is always helpful. And I love my bath. I like being immersed in water, and it's readily available. It doesn't cost me anything. It doesn't take too long. I don't have to go anywhere. Like, the barriers are very few. And sleep. Like, some days, if things are really hard, I'll just go to bed. It's like, I've had enough of this day. This day is done. Tomorrow is a new one, and I'll just call it. I mean, it could be 7:00, and it's like, yeah, I'm done. We'll try again tomorrow.
That's right. Do over. Tomorrow's a fresh start.
Yeah, and it always is.
The rest is healing. And I think that's one of those things that we kind of withhold as a reward. I can't go to bed until I get this done. The kids have to be down. That has to be handled. This is my time at the end of the day. We miss our bedtime and get cranky toddlers.
Yeah, I hear you. And I would also offer out that while we're resting and sleeping, that's when our subconscious and our heart voice can show up to solve a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. I have woken up in the morning or the middle of the night with all kinds of solutions or answers or great ideas. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. So this is a good way one method to cultivate that heart voice, to tune into the messages. See?
Yes.
Sleep is healing. And
sleep
insightful.
Is healing.
I love it. Was there anything else we didn't have a chance to explore or share? Anything you want to leave with readers? And please do let them know where they can find you online.
Yeah, Navigating Shitstorms is my handle on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and most recently TikTok, just starting there. And Liz Long Writes, WRITES.com is my website. You can sign up to stay in touch. It's not a weekly, even monthly. It's a random short email that I do send out. And the book, Navigating Shitstorms, is available in all the places. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, Kindle, and also on Audible. Hooray. If you prefer to listen.
You can take it on the go.
Take it on the go.
Marvelous. Thank you so much for joining me on the show, for sharing your story, for doing your part to inspire other people after coming through quite a story and a journey yourself. I'm so grateful that you kept showing up and show up for yourself this way and inspire other people to do the same.
Thank you, Susie. It was a pleasure and a lot of fun to be here and speak to your audience. And I hope that they can also find their heart voice and join me in Freedomville.
Yes, we'll have a big old party.
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. You'll find all the resources we discussed today online at happifiedlife.com, along with links to subscribe to Happified on your favorite player and a handy search tool so you can search all of our previous episodes. Help us grow by leaving a quick review and share this episode with a friend. Until next time, keep on shining.